Okay, here we are up under the RV now, and we want to look at some of the work that we had done after we'd talked in the earlier RV, and you saw some of the parts, or in the earlier video, some of the parts I had used. First thing I want to look at is right here. This is the steering dampener. Replaced it. It had the one, looked like the original. It was in pretty bad shape. Now this I just picked up at a local auto parts store for about 30 bucks. Of course, there's a lot of discussion on these about what are the best kind to install. There's some specialty ones you can install, that type of stuff. I just went back in with the original. So that's one of the front parts that I changed. Just quickly, another part I changed, you can't really tell much of, but I pulled the hubs off, all new brakes, bearings, seals. I had the rotors cut, all that kind of stuff. So the brakes were no problem, but they were needing some work done to them. We can come around over here. Another thing I can show you is where we talked about. Right there, you can see is that Moog for the sway bar, the bushing. And remember, I showed you in the, if you watch the earlier video on the mechanical, you'll see where I talked about how you had to cut those out. And right there where that is, that's where that metal shell went in, and with the rubber. Of course, all that comes out, and as you can see in the picture here, the Moog seal just goes right back in its place. Just kind of grease it up a little lithium. Of course, you can see it. This, pick my finger. That's the sway bar right there. So that's pretty straightforward to do. Another thing I did do is you can see it up in there. I put a new set of Bilsteins on the front on this RV. The shocks were in pretty bad shape. Another thing I did was, as we talked about, I didn't have, was you can see right here. This whole arm right here, that is the driver's side I-beam. Of course, you can't see it well here. It's right here. There's a shield right here. But this is the passenger side I-beam. And so what you have right here, as you can see, the I-beam ends here. There's a bolt right here. And inside this housing right here is where that I-beam, or what's called an axle pivot bushing, obviously, this is mounts to here, and so this is just where the axle pivots right here. And then this one here is pretty easy to change. You just pull this bolt out. There's plenty of room in the back. You can jack it and get this I-beam down, and then once you get this I-beam down, it's pretty simple. Swap out the bushing, get it back in, and get the hole lined up. Now the other one is a tad more trickier to get to, just because it works the same way. It's just trickier because of the way of where it lies. And so I'm going to try to move under the RV here a little bit and ask you to indulge me with a jerky camera. I'm doing this with a flip camera, so you can see right there. If you can see here, this is the end. Oh, let me get my arm up in here. This is the end of the passenger side right here. So this is the driver's side going to the passenger side. And right there, you can see the bushing up inside there. Now the issue you see is that it goes all the way back up in here. And so this is right there, what you're looking at is the oil pan. Of course, there's the oil filter. Here's the big framework. You can see that's the big framework that runs up under the engine. And so it's really, really difficult to get to this side. This one's tough to get out. It's tough to get to that bolt and get that bolt back in here loose. And then you can see, you can, if I can get the camera, there's the bolt. I apologize, I'm trying to do this with a flip camera and I can't see it well. Hopefully you can see the bolt there. And then another thing we can look at while we're here, right there's the back side. You can see where that, this is the sway bar, that's the end of the sway bar. The pointy thing is, and you can see the back side of that Moog bushing pushed through the I-beam. And so that was not too bad to do the bushings on the I-beams. Of course, I had to get those shells out. It took a little bit of time. These, the axle bushings are a little bit more of a work. They're tough to get them bolts out, and it's a little tough to get them axles out, and it's a little tough to get them axles back in. But doable. If you're a fairly good mechanic, got some good strength on you, because some of these bolts are on, you know, it's a job you can do, but it's, I wouldn't say it's for the faint of heart by any stretch of the imagination. Now, if we look back at the other one, remember in the video, I talked about, if I can see it, you can see right there, that is the front of those radius arm bushings. Of course, this thing, right, this big long thing you see in the camera is the radius arm. Looks like a big paddle. And so I'll go to the driver's side just because it's the easiest one to get to. Land on your back under an RV. And then that's what it looks like. Of course, then see you have the radius arm. Sorry, the sun's getting in. You get the radius arm. Of course, that's the bottom of the shock right there, the radius arm. You can see that's the bottom bolt. And of course, there's a top bolt up there, and it's basically, like I said, looks just like a big paddle. And it bolts down and comes into like a big screw at the end of it. And as you can move under here a little bit, you can see, of course, there's the nut. That's that 1.5 or 1.25 nut you got to get off. And then here's the whole scenario. You've got the washer, then you've got the blue thing is the urethane bushing, and then there's a collar, which is that black thing. Then, of course, there's another urethane bushing on the inside, and then another washer. To get these off, you've got to come up and pull. There's, of course, it's the back side. You have to pull these 3 bolts out right here because this whole bracket is what holds it in, and you cannot, you know, I've seen some talk about moving the A-arms and stuff. That just seemed way too much work. So basically you have to pull these 3 screws out, bolts out, which is pretty easy to do, and this bracket, and take this big nut off here, and this bracket falls off pretty easy and it comes apart. The trick is getting it back lined up. Now when you take this bracket and you basically just get this all assembled back on and just kind of put on loosely just so you got some movement, it's still pretty good bit of work. Of course, you see those nuts there, they're actually welded onto that plate, so that's not a problem. But the issue is just because the bolt runs through. Let me see if I can get to the other side, and you can see there, hopefully you can see that because I'm not looking through the camera. There's the bolts on the outside, and so then you've got to be able, let me move back around over here, and so then you've got to get those out and then get them back in. And it was a little bit of a work to line up. It was, you'd think they would just line right back up, but it did not. I had to get a jack and to work with this big radius arm to be able to get those back. That was probably the toughest part of the whole thing, was getting those 6 bolts, 2 sides, lined back up. That was a little bit of a chore. But once done, really not that difficult of a job. That nut's on there pretty good. Of course, you saw the big breaker bar if you saw the first video on the mechanical, so that was it. And so that's the main set of bushings that are in a front end of one of these twin I-beams. There is the axle pivot bushings, there are the sway bar bushings, and then there are the radius arm bushings. So that takes care of most of the bushing work in the front. Of course, greasing everything up. These twin I-beams are pretty tough, but they can be kind of, if you don't take care of these bushings, you can end up in quite. All right, here we are, a little farther back in the RV. Another thing I wanted to show you, if you've never seen one, is that the silver thing you see right there is the drive shaft. That right there is the emergency brake. The big round thing you see. So basically the emergency brake on this particular vehicles are not in the wheels like a standard truck or car. The back wheels, they're actually come off the tail of the tranny and basically lock up the drive shaft. There's basically a set of brake shoes in there. These were getting pretty worn. They weren't worn out, but they were getting pretty worn, and you got to really be careful with this emergency brake, because if you lose it, boy, you ain't got nothing, and you hate to see your RV taking off over the hill. I found some instructions on the internet of how to do it, and it actually wasn't as difficult as I first thought it was going to be. Actually, I did that some time back. That was actually one of the first projects I did, was this brake, before I did all the work on the front end that I showed you earlier. And so it was good. We got changed pretty good. You can see right over there, you might not be able to see it, that shiny thing. Of course, that's the fuel filter. That was replaced on this model. Another thing we can look at, again, excuse the jerkiness, I'm doing this with a flip camera, is, let me slide back, is the exhaust. The exhaust, of course, I left one here where you can see the original owner wasn't too good about keeping it clean. He had it kind of wired up, but I went back, and the exhaust was pretty floppy in this thing. So I went back, if I can get it, and you can see there, I put all new, all the way back through it, all new clamps, reclamp the exhaust system, which is this big long tube here. Of course, there you can see the exhaust out the back. So the exhaust was flapping in the breeze. It's pretty darn strong now. That was one thing I had done. Of course, if you can see in the back, I added the Bilstein shocks in the back. Now somebody, let me slide that here a little bit because I'll show you underneath the step, who knows RVs. My understanding is on a 350, which this is a Super Duty, not labeled a 350, does not have the rear sway bar. Now you'll notice this does. This is a 97 Tioga, and it's a Super Duty. It doesn't say E350 on the cab. And my understanding in that is that they did not have rear sway bars. Of course, now this one does have rear sway bars, so I'm not really clear if there was just like an in-between a 350 and a 450 for a year or two there before they relabeled it, or what happened, or how that works. It doesn't look like an aftermarket, and it may be. Fleetwood may have put it on themselves. I don't know. So that was one thing. Another thing, if you watched in the electrical video, swing around here, you'll see where I did some work on the step. Of course, we're underneath the step here, if you've never seen underneath one of these. That right there is the motor. My understanding is that's the motor out of a window drive of a Taurus. If you ever read on the web and your motor goes out, they tell you to go buy a Taurus electric window motor, and that's it. Of course, that's the control box. This is a quickie. If you can kind of see it right there, this is a quickie. The yellow thing is a light. This is a quickie electric step. Well, they call it a band step because it only has one step. Did not work when I got it. Had a couple of issues, mainly the door sensor, which if you watch one of the other videos, we talk about it by the front door. When you open and close the door, it just senses and opens and closes the window. The other thing I read was the ground. The ground can have issues in these things. Of course, the ground on this one, I reground, is right there. Put a new ground to it. And then they didn't do such a good job at the RV place, or whoever installed it. It just had all the bare wires hanging out. Of course, I came in here with a split shielded stuff you can buy, and wired it all up. It did not have a fuse in it. I put a fuse in it, and all of that kind of stuff. Cleaned it up nice now. Taped it all up, and it actually works perfect now. So that was another thing I did underneath. Other than clean it up, it wasn't too bad a shape. Clean it up, did a little bit of undercoating to kind of stave off the rust, that kind of thing. A lot to do under one of these RVs. If you've ever been under one, there's a lot of stuff under here. Of course, this particular model has two floors. It has you can see kind of a housing there. There's a subfloor there, then there's another floor above it. That's the actual decking floor, because you can see right here, these are the bottoms. Like I said, this is a basement model. Of course, these are the bottoms of the bins. There's three bins this side, 3 bins on the other side. Of course, and one of the bins has the generator in it. One bin has some plumbing. One bin has the drains and everything in it, the outdoor faucet, that kind of stuff. So resealed all of those with my trusty urethane roof sealant around all of those, cleaned everything up. Overall, this RV was in excellent shape mechanically and underneath, so there was not a lot to do other than the front end. The front end was in pretty bad shape, so I did quite a bit on it. Other than that, there really wasn't much to do back here at all, other than just kind of clean it up. I did cleaned up some of the wiring harnesses and kind of had some broken zip ties and stuff where there's a lot of wiring runs down the frame, so I had to repair all of that. Of course, I'm going to come across here if you'll let me. There's a look back up through the front end. Again, there's the brake. Of course, that's the catalytic. Well, it's one of the catalytic converter. I don't know if yeah, I guess it is, because I guess that's knotted up there. Of course, I'm looking back up through the front of the RV. Quite a bit of stuff under here if you've never been under one. A lot of stuff to go wrong, a lot of stuff to fix, a lot of stuff to maintain. All the time on a creeper. So I just want to take a quick look under here and just kind of let you see what happened. Some of the stuff that I did underneath more than the front end, just to kind of wrap up the stuff I did on it mechanically. And so not much else to look at and not real easy to see anyway. So that's it. So I hope to see you in our next video. See you then.